My mother's family are all Italian immigrants. So my grandparents were both born in Italy and raised in Italy, and those were my grandparents in Buffalo, and they from a very early age, I don't ever remember, we would go have holidays with them, and I did live in Buffalo for the very early part of my life, and that Italian immigrant family was always a big part of my growing up and my family as I grew up, and food was a big part of that. They both gardened. My grandfather and my grandfather had a farm when my mom was growing up. They had a small farm outside of Buffalo, but even when I knew them, my grandfather was a mason, and his job was to work in the big, huge ovens of the steel mills in Buffalo. So he would be the one who would fix the brick lining of these ovens. And so he died when I was about 12 of emphysema because of his work. But as early as I remember, they had this beautiful garden, my grandmother and grandfather, and my grandmother after he died. Until she died, they both died. Well, he died a little bit early. He was in his 70s, but she died when she was in her 90s. And up to the last moments of her life, she was very active in the garden. And, although I lived in kind of the 1970s and 80s, I grew up in the 1970s and 80s in the upper Midwest, which is not the best place for food and healthy food. Kind of known for our green bean casseroles and Velveeta cheese. I was completely insulated from that because the food that I got and the food that my mother made for me and taught me how to make was all completely made out of scratch, or almost completely made out of scratch. So, she passed on that same tradition. I remember, we would eat Grandma Rady's rice, quote unquote, and that was risotto. And I never knew that it was like this later it became this like gourmet thing that was on all the fancy gourmet restaurants. And, she would hand roll the tortellinis and made this amazing tortellini soup. Every Christmas we would have ravioli that was the pasta was handmade, the filling was handmade, everything was handmade, the tomato sauce from scratch.
Sounds delicious.
And my mother remembers events based on the meal that we had at the event. So she will remember, oh yeah, that's the time where I had that really good blah blah blah, or that time where I had that awful whatever. So that's how her memory works. So from a very early age, I ate amazingly well, and what my mother, and I think my mother taught me that tradition as well. So I've always gardened. I've always had in a lot of places in Cleveland. I've lived in Cleveland. I've lived in Seattle, and then here. I've had community gardens in all three places. Wow. I've had, so that whole tradition was just something that's in my DNA. I really do think it's in my DNA from Italy. And so, it's something that I don't cook with recipes, but I cook a lot. I cook from scratch. I've always been into like the farm to table. It's my grandmother's garden to table.
Right.
Before it was called.
Before it was a trend.
Table.
Yeah.
And so, it's nice now.
Before the hipsters got to it.
Yeah. Okay, the hipsters can have it.
Right.
But it's nice that the rest of the world is now like reawakening. Because that's all of our roots, really.
Sure.
It's not just my roots. If anyone in this country goes back enough, that's all of our roots from wherever we come from. So I became a doctor for a weird reason, which is that I was working in politics in Ohio. Right after college, I was working in the state legislature. I was running the office for a state senator, and I looked around at everybody doing politics, and I would say, like, the politicians are one part of the problem, but really the bigger part of the problem is our whole political class. All the people that you see working in the legislature, all the people that you see, kind of the lobbyists, the staff people, all the hangers-on, none of them have really had real jobs. I mean, most of that whole political class, that's their profession. So the people that are really crafting our policies about everything, about healthcare, about transportation, about education, have never done any of those things.
Wow.
And I had this realization when I was, 22, 23, and I said, oh, well, that's screwed up. And if I want to do politics well, I'm going to have to have some profession which will give me an entree into people's lives and understanding really what's needed and not some kind of knee-jerk response. So, of course, I went to medical school. obviously.
Right. Logic. Right.
So, no, I had done some pre-med, and then I had ended up majoring in English and political science. So I went to medical school for the reason to do politics better. And it worked out really well, because then after I went to medical school, I learned a lot about all this kind of history that I talked to you about, the community health center movement, community-oriented primary care, which is another kind of way that doctors can practice medicine. And I became really drawn to family medicine, which is what I do. I'm a family physician. And because it is a more holistic view, you're certainly treating an individual, but you're looking at that individual as part of the family and part of a community and what that all means. And I also really liked the medicine part of medicine. I really liked the relationship building with patients and how you can have this really intimate relationship with people, with your patients, and how they let you in and tell you their stories. And it's quite, touching, and it's quite, it's a gift. It's a huge gift. And so, and I feel the responsibility to, use that gift for good and not for evil. So this, and the whole community health center movement is sort of a natural extension of that early impulse to say, okay, well, how can I do something which affects political change, but does it from this really intimate grassroots level or place, and brings that up into the kind of the policy level and to the community level and all of that, and the political level.
Yeah.
So food's part of that. So we have, when you look at why people are healthy or not healthy, a huge part of that is how they live their lives, the amount of stress they have in their lives, and certainly poverty and unemployment and all of that has to do with that a lot. But also kind of, do they have the access to the things that make us all healthy? One of those things is just the natural environment in general, and being able to access the natural environment. And another is exercise and physical activity. And another really big one is food. And so we've coined this term of food deserts. And now we have in Santa Fe, there are 4 big food desert census tracts all located in the south side. And there's no good grocery stores. So when I see a patient that comes into my office and they're struggling with obesity or nutrition issues, and I say, oh, well, really you need to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, you need to exercise more. Okay, go away. And, most doctors say that and don't ask, well, where do you live and what's your life like? And if I'm a single mama and I have, I'm working 10 hours a day, I don't have a car, so it takes me a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to commute to work and back on the bus. Especially in Santa Fe, we have terrible public transportation. And then I have to pick up my kids, and then I'm on the bus, so where am I going to go to eat, because there's no grocery store on the bus route, and there's like a McDonald's and a Wendy's and a Taco Bell and a burrito spot, and not can I eat there and get the food, but it'll take me like 15 minutes. The kids are going to be happy.
Right.
And it's going to be cheap.
Sure.
Way cheaper than what I could get in the grocery store.
And nothing to think of time to prepare a meal.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
So
if I take another hour, 2 hours out of my day, and the kids have homework and they need to get to sleep and all that stuff, so there's not enough time for all of that. So I, as the doctor, can say, oh, by the way, eat more fruits and vegetables, but
good luck.
I can't solve that problem. So if I start asking my patients, well, what's your life like, and how do you do this? So some of the things that we've done at La Familia are really worked with the South Side. There's a South Side Farmers Market in Santa Fe. It's only on Tuesdays right now. When we started it, there were 4 vendors. And now I don't know how many there were at the end of last season, but I think there were like 12 or something. So really trying to expand that, promote it. And another thing is the thing I was talking about earlier, which is this MoGrow program. It's kind of a CSA, and they people who have SNAP benefits can get a box of fresh fruits and vegetables, and we can go look at that. And it's worth $20, but they only have to pay $10, and they can use their SNAP benefit $10.
That's cool.
And we're signing up patients for that. We're doing some cooking classes to help people understand how to take all this stuff and make it, because if their parents also stopped at the Wendy's and McDonald's,
they
never learned that tradition. And so to show them how it doesn't take you don't have to take 2 hours to make a good healthy meal. You can do it quickly with the stuff that we have in this box for you right here.
On.
So,
That's amazing.
So how can we change the environment, like what we did with the farmers market? How can we to make sure that people have an environment that's conducive to their health. Because as I said before, what we doctors do in the walls of our little exam rooms are about 15 to 25% of what make you healthy or unhealthy. But the place that you live and how much money you have and, you know, all that environmental, community, family stuff, that's like the other 75 or 80% of what makes you healthy or not healthy.
Right.
I have this discussion with our board.
Right.
And I have this discussion with, you know, a lot of people who are associated with the clinic who are like, now, why are we doing a community garden? What does that have to do with medical care?
Right.
And I have to explain this stuff. So not everybody gets it automatically because we have a very siloed way of thinking about things. But for me as a clinician, you know, if I really care about handing my patients some recommendations and whether or not they can really follow those recommendations, because it's very frustrating for clinicians to say, eat better.
Sure.
Okay, I understand. And you say, do you understand what I mean? Yeah, I understand what you mean. But patients aren't going to offer all those complicated reasons why they can't unless you really ask them.
Sure.
And maybe they don't even know how to articulate that also. So one other program we have is called Cena, which stands for Healthy Cena, which is Spanish for dinner, but also means Comunidad Ejercicio Nutrición y Acción. And we have, if a family is struggling with nutrition issues, we can refer them to this program. It's really focused on the kids, but the adults have to participate. And they get low-cost passes to the Genevieve Chavez Center to exercise or do swimming or whatever. And they enroll in these cooking classes, and they can access the MoGrow, and they get a visit with the nutritionist. But they also get a home visit from a community health worker to actually see where you're living and to look around and think about, well, okay, given this environment, what can I really recommend for you? You know, rather than having the doctor in the exam room, this very sterile environment, saying, eat more broccoli, you know, when the nearest grocery store is 10 miles away. I think the end of food is we don't think of it as food. I think the end of food is it's like I think it goes back to the beginning of my story when you said, what's the beginning of food for me? And I couldn't really tell you because I didn't think of food as a separate thing.
Sure.
You know, that's one reason when people come to me and talk about calorie counting and dieting and the Fitbit thing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, no, I really think that's the wrong road to go down. Because when you're so stressed about everything in your life, and then on top of that I tell you to count your calories, it's not going to be something natural. It's not going to feel healthy. And I think until we can really make it totally natural and totally, like, again, our ancestors did. They didn't think about food. They didn't think about food justice. I mean, we have to think about food justice now because we've screwed up the system so much.
Right.
But it would be nice to get to a place where we don't have to think about that. And it's just part of who we are when we feel good is that we're eating right, we're exercising, we have a lifestyle that incorporates all those things and doesn't have to be called by all their separate labels.